One of the people you worked very closely with in advocating for this federal legislation and who participated in the press conferences you just mentioned is Sylvia Lasalandra. Sylvia and her husband were successful restaurateurs here in New Jersey when her story began. Sylvia, good morning, and thank you for agreeing to be on DIY World Improvement.
Thank you, Catherine.
I'd like to take you back to the year 2000. You're 32 years old. You've been married 7 years. You and your husband, Michael, are about to open your second restaurant, and you've decided it's also time to add to your family. Talk for a few minutes about what happens after your daughter Melina's birth.
After she was born, I just remember falling apart. There was no bond. I was scared and shamed because here I am, we wanted to have this child, and she's born, and I felt that my world just overturned, and I didn't know what to do. So I talked to one of the nurses, and we discussed adoption, giving my child up. I wasn't in my right frame of mind, and my family, the intimate family, knew what I was going through, and they thought it was something that would just need to pass. As the nurse did, the nurse just patted me on the shoulder and said, it's the baby blues. But there was no bond. There was just fear and, oh, my God, what am I going to do next?
So what happened when you got home?
When I got home, the welcoming committee was there, my mother videotaping, and my family, my brothers, my aunt. We took the 25-minute ride home from the hospital. I opened the door. I see them all out on the lawn, and I basically handed Melina, my child, over to my mom and ran upstairs and cried and sobbed and shut the door and just kept crying.
And then there was a pivotal episode.
Yes, I had this horrific nightmare. I took an afternoon nap, and during the nightmare, I had these very intrusive dreams of harming my child. And when I woke up, I ran over to the bassinet, which was still in my room, and Melina was peacefully sleeping. So I know I didn't do any harm to her, but I was so upset and so disturbed by the dream that I emptied all my medicine cabinet and dispersed all the pills on my bed and thought of doing the unthinkable. And Melina just moved. She sighed a little bit, and I walked over again, and she just opened her eyes and looked at me, and I said, what am I doing? And called up my mom. And I was crying, and she made me promise her that I wouldn't do anything stupid. She was at my house within 10 minutes, picked up the baby from the bassinet, told me that everything was going to be okay. 5 minutes later, I hear more footsteps, and it's Michael in his chef attire. Apparently my mother had called Michael to tell him what was going on, so he had come home. And it was just a very emotional moment, and my mother made a promise with Michael saying that I will take care of your daughter if you take care of my daughter. And Melina went to go stay at Mom's for about 9 months. I went to go visit every day, sometimes 2 times a day, 3 times a day. But her primary home was with Mom and Dad.
How did your experience with PPD change your life?
Remember going back to all the frustration from one doctor to another doctor who's prescribing me that pill and that pill. I had a candy store of pills, but there was no help. Finally recovering from PPD, or in the process of recovering, I swore to myself that I would never even talk about this again. I'm embarrassed. You're over this illness and you move on. But something happens to you. There's that spirit, I think, that taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, I'm here, and there's other people suffering. You're not done yet. So I went and started my own publishing company and wrote Daughter's Touch. There's a great quote by Mark Twain that says, thunder's good, thunder's impressive, but it's lightning that gets the work done. And I feel I was the lightning in this book to help women, and to help families. I just took that initiative, and I contacted a wonderful advocate who was in it way before I was in it, Mary Jo Codey, and asked her if she needed any help. The rest is history. We became friends, and we support each other, and we helped each other, and we spoke together, we traveled together. This was not done by one person overnight. It was many, many years in the making.
I reread A Daughter's Touch the other day. One of the things that struck me about it was that it makes you laugh. It makes you cry, and sometimes within the same minute. Somehow, in spite of what a horrible time that had to be for you and Michael and your entire family, you found humor in the situation, and I find that to be a remarkable thing. But you didn't just write a book. You took that book, and you turned it into an award-winning movie. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
When the book had been out a few months, I contacted a director in New York City, and again, nobody, it's a downer, and then he decided to do it. He's like, well, how long do you want it? I said, I want it about 5 to 8 minutes. I want to get the ugliest part of the book. I remember him sitting there with his assistant. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, that's what's going to really make people aware how ugly this illness is. So why not take the darkest, which was chapter 11, On the Brink, where it was that nightmare. And he did it. I submitted it to the New York International Film and Video Festival. Well, I was picked to showcase it, and I won Best Director. I remember we were auditioning people in the city, and nobody could play Sylvia. It was funny. I'm thinking I had these pretty girls, and I had these women who had children but never suffered PPD, so they didn't get it. So I'll never forget Howard at the time looked at me and said, I hate to do this to you, but the only way I'm going to shoot this is if you play this scene. I'm like, no way. I can't relive that. Sure enough, I did, and it wasn't even acting.
And you got Best Short Drama as well as Best Direction.
And it went into the Short Corner Con Film Festival, where it was shown. That's a big thing for me, to be in Cannes or even to be displayed in New York, and it traveled to all the major cities.
I think it's a remarkable thing. Here you are, a restaurateur, and now an author, and a filmmaker, and an actress, and an activist. You mentioned that you and Mary Jo Codey work together, and I know from my work with both of you that there are no more passionate advocates for other victims of postpartum depression. Talk a little bit about what form your advocacy and your activism took.
First of all, Mary Jo and at the time Governor Codey really took the bull by its horns and took it to a whole different level, and I feel I was one of the catalysts. And I remember speaking. You think you speak once and you're done, right? Well, then people start calling you. And, of course, I don't say no to anyone. The Newark Archdiocese, different faith groups, different consortia were just word of mouth. It took in a role of its own, and I could not say no. And, again, donating all my books, my thought is if I can help one woman, I'm going to help them. So it wasn't about money. I think I went in it never thinking that it was going to be about money, and that's why it's done so well. And I've been blessed. Change is not done with one person. It takes a great group of people and a team. It's always about giving back. I think that's what people forget. It's not about money.
And I totally agree with that. I know you just published a new book called Mommy, Were You Happy the Day I Was Born? Tell us a little bit about the book and what prompted you to write this one.
If you talk to anyone that's in publishing, what they'll tell you is never write a children's book because it's so hard to market. I didn't listen to the naysayers. This is something I wrote for my daughter. It was a difficult book to write because it was a book to say, hey, even though I was sick and I couldn't show you, I never did not love you. I always loved you from the moment I gave birth to you. It's been a special book, and it's more of a gift to my daughter and a gift for all mothers that had suffered PPD and want to read this to their child.
I know that you have a couple more books in the works. There are some film projects. You're not done.
No, I'm not. I have another book that will be titled Can the Guilt. Once you conquer PPD, you still have that feeling of shame or guilt or the stigma that's attached to the illness, and it'll be one chapter, paperback, dedicated, again, in a humorous way, to throw all those thoughts and negative feelings, throw them in the garbage can. How to finally let go, and it's to move on. And I'm excited about that. I'm in the process of working on that. We're working on a documentary on PPD and to raise awareness and support. So we're still trying to get some funding for that. Just, things like this take time.
Well, thank you very much, Sylvia. It was great to talk with you, and I look forward to the next book, and I look forward to the next movie.
Thank you for involving me.
I always thought Sylvia was a force of nature, but I was never sure which one, and now I know. She's amazing, and you guys had a lot of fun while you worked together, too.
Well, Sylvia is a special person, I think, right from heaven, and I'm really, really thrilled that I could be working with her.
Yeah, she's amazing. I've watched you speak before so many audiences, healthcare professionals, social service professionals, mental health professionals, women's groups, all around the country. In fact, I know that yesterday you were up at Boston at Harvard speaking with a group of doctors. I've sat with you through media interviews and testimony on the Hill. You and Sylvia sacrificed a lot of your privacy and the privacy of your families in going public with your stories. I alluded earlier to an episode. I know you had talked at one point to a newspaper about intrusive thoughts, and talked about an episode with the microwave because you knew that people needed to really understand how terrible these thoughts are. Mm-hmm. And right after your husband became governor, a shock jock picked it up and went trash with it, which made headlines all over. But, this kind of thing happens. Has it been worth it, Mary Jo?
Every step of the way has been worth it. The issue that we had was, one of my intrusive thoughts when I had Kevin was, oh my God, what if I put him in the microwave? And that's when I signed up for the psychiatric hospital. I was like, take me away. And this radio shock jock picked it up and said, oh, a microwave, Mom. And my husband was so furious. And believe it or not, I wasn't furious. I was prepared I was a den mother. I was prepared for them to take my den away from me, my boys, and I thought they would stop letting me teach. I thought there'd be demonstrators on my lawn. So I was prepared long ago to be made fun of by people. And I really never was until the shock jock came along. And when he made fun of me, I just let it roll off my back. I was like, I know the truth. I know this was a disease because environmentally there was no reason for me to be depressed. So it had to be a disease. And I knew if it was a disease and I knew it was true, his argument could never hold up. So I wasn't even upset.
Your husband was, though.
Oh, he was horribly upset. He kind of threatened to beat up the guy, even though he was the governor. But he was talking as a husband and not as a politician when he met the shock jock in the hallway of the radio station.
And the outcry in your favor was pretty big, mm-hmm. And that was gratifying to see. Mm-hmm. And so you'd do it all again if you had it to do?
Yes, we got the Melanie Block Stokes Mothers Act passed, and all over the country, new moms and their families have to be educated about postpartum depression so that they don't commit suicide, so that they know it's an illness, so that they know that there's help out there. We want them to speak up when they're down so that they don't go through what we went through. So am I proud of that? Yes. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat.
And I know that's one of the things you're proudest of. What else, among all the things that you've been doing since 1994 when you first went public, what would you cite as the things you're proudest of beyond the legislation?
Well, beyond the legislation was a speech that I did last spring for the OBGYN's national conference. There were about 5,000, 6,000 doctors in attendance. And I gave my speech on postpartum depression, not statistics, because they were all physicians and healthcare professionals. I told them what I went through. I told them about my scary thoughts. I told them how I wanted to have a baby. I told them that on one hand I understood that having a baby was God's greatest gift to me, and then I was getting shock therapy at the same time. I told them how bizarre, how painful, how true my story was. And I got a standing ovation from 5,000 healthcare professionals, and that standing ovation proved to me that they got the message. And they're going to take that message, bring it back to their practices, and hopefully moms and their babies can make it through the way I did. Not the way I did. They don't want to make it through the way I did. They want to make it their way through guidance and knowledge that the doctors are going to give to them.
And I've been at many of those conferences with you where you sit and you listen to doctors talk about the clinical side of perinatal mood disorders, and then suddenly you get up and you're the voice of the patient. Mm-hmm. And I often wonder how often that voice gets heard. The people who actually lived through this and what it meant to them, to their families.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I got invited to Harvard. You think I went to Harvard for my brains? No, I did not go to Harvard for my brains. I went to Harvard because I'm the real story. They don't need any more textbook stories about postpartum depression that professionals might not pay attention to because it's a woman's emotional issue. This was the story. The doctors, they listened. They didn't go out for coffee. They didn't leave to do their rounds. Every single one of them listened to the story, and I think, again, I say it hit home and they understood.
Amen for that. Mary Jo, thank you for being my guest, and thank you for being such a tireless advocate for victims of postpartum depression and for their families. We urge anyone who wants to learn more about perinatal mood disorders to go to www.njspeakup.gov. That's www.njspeakup.gov. You'll find a link on the DIY World Improvement Facebook page. Feel free to like us, and thank you for listening.
I ran over to the bassinet, which was still in my room, and Melina was peacefully sleeping. So I know I didn't do any harm to her, but I was so upset and so disturbed by the dream that I emptied all my medicine cabinet and dispersed all the pills on my bed and thought of doing the unthinkable. And Melina just moved. She sighed a little bit, and I walked over again, and she just opened her eyes and looked at me, and I said, "What am I doing?" and called up my mom. And I was crying, and she made me promise her that I wouldn't do anything stupid. Thank you, Catherine.
I'd like to take you back to the year 2000. You're 32 years old. You've been married 7 years. You and your husband, Michael, are about to open your second restaurant, and you've decided it's also time to add to your family. Talk for a few minutes about what happens after your daughter Melina's birth.
After she was born, I just remember falling apart. There was no bond. I was scared and shamed because here I am, we wanted to have this child, and she's born, and I felt that my videotaping and my family, my brothers, my aunt, we took the 25-minute ride home from the hospital. I opened the door, I see them all out on the lawn, and I basically handed Melina, my child, over to my mom and ran upstairs and cried and sobbed and shut the door and just kept crying.
And then there was a pivotal episode.
Yes, I had this horrific nightmare. I took an afternoon nap, and during the nightmare, I had these very intrusive dreams of harming my child. And when I woke up, the world just overturned, and I didn't know what to do. So I talked to one of the nurses, and we discussed adoption, giving my child up. I wasn't in my right frame of mind, and my family, the intimate family, knew what I was going through, and they thought it was something that would just need to pass, as the nurse did. The nurse just patted me on the shoulder and said, "It's the baby blues." But there was no bond. There was just fear and, oh, my God, what am I going to do next?
So what happened when you got home?
When I got home, the welcoming committee was there, my mother.
One of the people you worked very closely with in advocating for this federal legislation and who participated in the press conferences you just mentioned is Sylvia Lasalandra Fradella. Sylvia and her husband were successful restaurateurs here in New Jersey when her story began.
Sylvia, good morning, and thank you for agreeing to be on DIY World Improvement.